fab shed guy here. We're going to talk about the Smart & Brown screw and feed drivetrain. The belt drive comes to the headstock. That turns the spindle, and then there's a right hand left hand drive or forward reverse drive which feeds a little pinion gear up in here, runs through the quadrant to the Norton gearbox. I'll take this end cover off, we can see it better. Yeah, you can read this up in the owner's manual. I'll do some links. So here's our drive gear coming out from under the headstock. All right, I'll put it into left, it's going that way. Put it into right, it's going that way. It's not. The shaft sits up underneath and gets its drive from the headstock, and here it is from the machiner stripped down. That's how it sits. There's the pinion gear sitting at the end, and basically you've got a shaft on two bearings and a drive gear, and this part here is where your safety pin mechanism is hidden away. The idea being, if your machine locks up, pin snaps, you find where it's locked and come back to it. If this isn't moving, then you're not going to get screws and feeds. If the shaft's moving and the gear's not, then that's your shear pin that's gone. If you've not got screw and feed, start at this end and then work your way through. We'll go and have a look at that little shear pin on the bench. Here's where the part sits in the main housing with the headstock removed. And there's the underside of the headstock showing where it meshes in. Alrighty, so we've pulled this out of the machine. Use the official spanner. So there's your 35 tooth drive gear. Little key there. And there is your shear pin. Oh. So we'll push your little pin out. Yeah, someone's really stuffed something in here. I'll drive that out. Yeah, I didn't have a drift the right size anyway, never mind. Right. So there's your little shear pin. And we sit on there. We stress the system, the shear pin's gone, and we rotate around. Thin air. Right, so basically all of that just to see the shear pin. I'll put it back together. Back to the tear down, and here's the Norton gearbox removed. And the bones picked clean. Okay, so there's your drive coming from under the headstock, and it's going to come in something like that and drive the gears that run on the quadrant, And this is the gear that takes it into the Norton gearbox. This is where you change the gear for the change wheels, change gears. You're going to take off your lower gear, loosen off your quadrant nuts, take off your quadrant. Out comes this standard 1/22 driving gear. There's its mounting stud.
And this gear is properly on a set of bearings.
And for the change gears, if you need to put a complex chain in, there's a gear mounting stud. Right, just have a look, see what this is all about, eh? Okay.
Well, in for a penny, in for a pound. We'll take that to pieces. There's a grub screw in there. Take that out.
Okay, so out came the little grub screw. Opposite the grub screw is a little spot for a Tommy bar. Okay, so there you go. You've got your gear screwed onto the boss. You've got your spindle on which the thing mounts.
You've got your
Twin sets of bearings on your 1/22 quadrant drive gear. If you get a little bit of slot, you can adjust the tension on the bearings with your boss.
everything goes back together and in the spare part department.
And we're back to where we started. So I'll have a look at putting the just the stud for the quadrant gears.
Okay, so you've got your threaded nut on the end, your stud lock nut, the rotating brass shaft.
Change gears go on the shaft.
A keyed spacer ring. And finally, there's your stud.
So your shaft locates. And there you go. Tightened on. Good to go. So we've got through the gears now, actually to the Norton gearbox. So here's the drive to the gearbox. Just comes off there. And it's on a keyed
Shaft. These are cap ends for bearings, so don't be taking those off. Won't do any good.
If you want to get that key out there, then what you need to do
is take that collar off.
Okay, so if you want to take this collar off, loosen up the grub screw and give that a little nudge. That will come out. Then you can get your key out.
Right, we'll put this back together. There's a bit of a bandit bolt on it, but it does the job, and it's what was there when I broke it down.
Right, so we're what you see on the lathe, the Norton box. And we'll look inside the box. So with the inspection cover off, you can see that if I unlock the gear selector, this arm moves back outwards and allows you to select different gear ratios. And as you lock it back in, the arm goes over until it properly engages the gear mechanism. So X and Y gives you 2 ratios, then 3 variations, then 8.
We'll tear into it and take the front off.
So we'll start at this end, take the knobs off first, drive your pin out. On the underside there is an Allen key as well, so that was already loosened off. So on this, we don't have to take all this gubbins off. Drive that pin out. Right, there is a grub screw on this as well, okay, which I've already loosened off.
That's the outer washer of a 3-part thrust bearing.
This shaft rotates and this is a thrust bearing, so it transfers movement, there you go, to the arm. Okay, so your selector arm's off. This is a spring detent. Yeah, there's a pin in there. So drive the pin out and this whole assembly will come this way and there'll be a spring in there. So right, so now we've got 4 studs on the corner to come up away. So you're only going to take this front off if you've got drive to the gearbox. This shaft here just isn't rotating, or there's a problem with the output. You're not going in here for kicks and giggles because it's a chew. Okay, so this then comes out this way. Okay, and that reveals your gearbox. So you've got a selector arm
On the right and
on the left, which moves this gear here and engages 3 positions. And what I didn't want to do is have that come out, because that goes to a rack right at the back. So that's your front cover taken off, and on the front cover, in each of the corners where you can sort of barely see, there's a covered up
brass cap screw covering the mounting bolts for the box.
So you can either take this front plate off on the lathe or take your 4 cover screws off and take the whole box assembly off. There's 2 threaded location pins on the opposing corners as well. The central selector has got thrust bearings on the inside as well, same as the outside. So we've got power coming in, we're turning the gearbox, the selector comes in and selects whichever
gear you're going for on the corn cob.
I've just got to keep it in mesh and that's transferring the drive through here down to the bottom, which is the feed screw. This side, you've got your gear selector arm, which can go to position 1, position 2, position 3. All right, and that gives you A, B and C, A, B, C.
And then you've got your
X, Y selector here. And you can see at the back. There we go. And then if we throw the
selector arm,
usually you're pulling out, throwing it, pushing in. And that's because the far end of the selector,
there's a
key which engages 2 positions on a keyed slot in the back there. And that's a blighter to get back in. Okay, so we've done our XY, our ABC, and our numbers 1 through 8. If this box is locked up and something isn't quite working right, there are intermediate positions that you can find. I can take an intermediate position on the feed, so I can feel how that one moves, feel how the intermediate moves, and feel how the splined shaft moves. So you can isolate each of the shafts and see how they move, and then if you knock it out of gear up here, I can then feel how that top shaft's moving, and all of those shafts move quite nicely. Okay, well here it is lying on its back. It's quite easier to see it actually. If I was going to work on the gearbox, this is how I'd be on it. We're going to get the XY selector in, which fits with this toothed rack right down at the bottom. Might see if I can get a better angle for you there. So right down in the guts, you can see that there's 2 positions for my key to sit in, and that little rack there just flops downwards. Okay, after a fair bit of fiddle-dee-dee,
the trick here is to get Allen key up under the rack, get the gear engaged, then lift the gear out, get your Allen key out and get it back in before it drops, and you can then sequence it by just moving it forward or backward a notch as needed.
just check you've got it in the right spot. So that's in a locked position, and I'm going to come, oh, no, yeah, there. That's in a locked position, and my cogs are really nicely lined up.
Right, I'll move to the X position.
So we're in A, X, 8.
screw cutting.
A Y8 B Y8 C Y8 7 6 5 4 3 2 1.
So that's your ratio selector right there. That gives me CY1 screw cutting. So just have a peep at the underside of the ratio selector mechanism. The selector arm moves across, moved by the rack and pinion at the bottom. As the shaft rotates, a worm drive connects with the corrugated section and pulls the arm over and into the lock position. The pinion gear, worm drive and brass bronze section slide on the central arbor.
Okay, so we've got the underview of the movement of that arm.
The central arbor remains stationary, the brass bronze bit slides up and a pin engages on the back of the ratio selector into differently graded depth holes on the back of the ratio dial.
There we are. Engaged position.
Disengaged. There's your pin for your depth holes.
Move along the rack.
Right, fair dues, we're back upright and we'll go into the feed and screw end.
Alright, so we're rotating the feed shaft. You can see that feed shaft there spinning round. This gear on the spline shaft, which comes off this rotisserie type shaft, is driving the feed. But if you select screw, and it's going to slide that cog onto the screw, and now we're in screw feed. Throw it back out. So the screw cutting shaft doesn't come all the way through. It's got the same spline arrangement, but there's a gap here.
That lead screw can rotate independently.
At the far end, yon way, the feed and the screw go into just a pillar block with a bushing in it. On the screw feed, you've got cap heads holding a cover plate. You've then got a locking ring here, which is how you put tension on your bearings. Allen key to lock the whole thing up. There's 3 positions of that, and there's 3 positions for a Tommy bar or pin spanner to get in there. So I've pulled out the screw shaft
And pressed off your big old boy thrust bearings.
2 bearings back to back, Come see, come ça, come see. This captures the bearing at this end, lines it up for the gap in the gearbox, Tommy bar positions again, and one Allen key to lock it, and your second lock ring to put the right tension on those bearings. But the good news is the whole assembly
comes out of here reasonably easily.
So there's your splined gear driver. This should happily engage here. And these ends on this machine, which has had a hard time, they're a little bit canally. RP, not too bad.
Right, pull out the feed shaft.
There you go. There's a little Allen key engages a dimple. You can pull.
And if you're lucky, it comes out.
In this part of the, I can feel that's running smoothly and beautifully. In this part of the machine,
everything can run freely and independently if you set it from the rest of the box. I've just taken out 2 grub screws there. You can see a little hole there for the oil.
quite gnarly tips on these for really engaging that. They don't want that to come loose, do they? Okay, they locate here, which is the gear drive to the feed shaft. There we go. Quite simple. It's a slow speed part of the gearbox, so all it's got is a simple bushing. It's got 2 bushings and an oil drip coming through, and that's your lot.
Just completely engaged the lock nut there. And you can see we've got nice smooth drives. C, B, A, X, Y. We've got feed. I can put it on neutral. If I go on screw, I'll drop that out of the end there. So,
Final component, the pillow block. Right, yeah, we get to the pillow block towards the far end of your lead screw, and just there it goes, sitting in there. So we've got a number 6 pitch gauge there. We'll have a look at this here block. So there's your pillow block. We've got a bronze bushing, cross drilled for a little oil feed there, tapped out, so you've got a couple of pins to go in either end, and once it's located, 4 cap heads to hold it tight. Just check that they're nice and smooth inside here, that the oil can get through to lubricate, and that your shaft ends are nice and tidy. This one here is a little bit the worse for wear, and check your shafts are straight as well. Wonderful. Thank you for watching. I'm out.